Hello, my name is Alex and welcome to my channel. In the previous video I was talking about Ableton Live's user interface and showed you how simple it was. So by now you should be more or less familiar with what Ableton Live's interface elements look like, where to find them and what they are for. But we didn't talk about Ableton Live's settings, and settings can really influence your experience from working with Ableton Live. So today let's talk about how to improve it, whether you are an experienced user or just getting started. This is going to take time, but the good thing is that you will need to do it only once. Now, without any further ado, let's go. Even if you don't have them yet, eventually you will need dedicated folders for all your samples, presets, projects, templates and whatnot. So it is a good idea to create these folders early on so that they naturally embed into your workflow. And with the help of Ableton Live's browser, you can always have them at hand. So for example, I have one folder for all presets and samples and another one for projects. If I add them to Ableton Live, they will be in browser's places subgroup. To do it, I need to click on the Add folder directly in Ableton Live browser and navigate to the folder I want to add. And if you are on Ableton Live 12, you'll need to go to File, Add folder to browser and then navigate to a folder of your choice. Pro tip here: if you have some sample libraries like machine expansions, I advise you to add them here as separate places as well. Now let's go through some menus. There's not much to do in File, Edit or Create or Help at the moment, but let's take a close look at the View menu. Most settings here are toggle switches, which means if you turn one of them on, some other one will go off. And some of them are just duplicating existing controls on the screen. For example, the track delay, the crossfader and the performance impact are turned off in the View menu. But if you look at the bottom right side of the screen, you will see three black buttons that will go yellow once I click on them. And this will bring in some additional stuff, but if you go back to the View menu, you will see that the corresponding items in the menu have been highlighted. Now, if I click on them, then all the additional stuff will go away. However, there's one important setting here that you need to be aware of, and it is called the second window. So this will bring a second window of Ableton Live so that you can have a session and arrangement views in two separate windows. This is not really convenient to have them on one regular screen unless it's ultra wide. But if you have two screens, then you can move one of them to the second screen, and this might come handy. And now let's go to the Options Preferences, the most important collection of settings in Ableton Live. It has several sections, so let's go through them one by one. Look and Feel section is all about the general settings of Ableton Live. In Language and Behavior subsection, you can choose display language, set the follow behavior between scroll and page. We talked about follow last time, and show or hide some of the labels to save screen space. In Track and Clip Color, you can either set track colors at random for every new project if you keep auto assign track color on, or you can choose your preferred track color from the menu. The clip color can also be set here at random or inherit the track color. And I suggest you keep it as track color because it helps keep your session look more accurate and readable. But keep in mind that you can change any color of any clip or track at any time, so these are just the default settings. And finally, the display customization allows you to change the theme, zoom, brightness and other visual settings of Ableton Live. These are basically down to your taste, but pay attention to enable high DPI mode setting because some plugins may display incorrectly when this is enabled. So if you have any issues with how some of your old plugins are displayed, try disabling high DPI mode and see whether you get any improvement. Audio is a very important section because this is where all the audio settings are stored. In Audio Devices subsection, you can select the driver type, which will define the list of audio devices. And please note that for MME DirectX driver type you will have two separate lists: audio input devices and audio output devices. This is the only way how you can choose built-in speakers of your laptop as an output device if you have them. And if you choose ASIO driver type, you'll be left with just one list of audio devices that you have installed drivers for, and there will be a hardware setup button to open a driver console for a device you choose. It is an extremely useful thing to set up a channel configuration, especially if your audio devices have plenty of inputs and outputs. So if you click on Input Config or Output Config buttons, a new window will appear with the list of all available inputs or outputs for the chosen device. So here you can enable or disable the ones you don't use, for example, because you don't have the respective equipment yet. And because they are separated into mono and stereo subgroups, you can choose precisely what you want. You can also label them here so that you know exactly which one to choose during track setup. So for example, my Complete Audio 6 audio interface has 6 input channels and 6 output channels. And I can label them as head left and head right, and just as head here, because I know that my first two outputs are headphones. So now they will appear as such in the drop-down menus, and when I need to make a choice, I will know which option exactly is which. In sample rate subsection, you choose in-out sample rate and set default SR and pitch conversion. Sample rate is device dependent. So for example, my Complete Audio 6 audio interface can work with sample rates up to 192 kHz. We will talk about sample rates in some other video, but I recommend keep the setting at 48 kHz for now. As for the second parameter, it just defines how accurate Ableton Live will handle audio files when they have different sample rate from the project sample rate, and this can be high quality or normal. I recommend keep it as high quality, but you can always choose another setting for individual audio files later in the project. Now, latency subsection behaves differently depending on the driver type, but for ASIO option, these parameters are typically defined by audio device's driver and can be changed via a driver console. I suggest you keep the default settings here, but if you experience any kind of audio glitches, try changing buffer size or sample rate to reduce the latency until the issue is gone. Now I can change the sample rate from this menu, but if I need to change the buffer size, I will need to go to the console and I need to click the hardware setup and then choose it from this drop-down menu. Link tempo and MIDI section is where you set up your external input devices such as MIDI controllers. Actually, my best advice here would be to visit a manufacturer's website and find instructions on how to set up your devices in Ableton Live. This is because it may involve choosing some specific and not obvious options from these menus, especially if your device is new on the market and not listed among the devices supported natively by Ableton Live yet. File folder section is where you define management settings. I recommend keeping everything as default. However, let's take a look at some of the settings to make better choices if possible. We will only need the data handling subsection. Create analysis files is a kind of a controversial setting among Ableton Live users. The idea is that if enabled, Ableton Live will create an ASD file next to an audio file after inputting it to Ableton Live. These files are considered as garbage by many, but actually they contain analysis data about the file for quicker access. And most importantly, if you make any changes with this file in Ableton Live, like adjusting its volume or pitch, These settings can be saved within an ASD file so that you don't have to do it again if you decide to use the file in some other Ableton Live project. So long story short, I prefer to keep them. And Sample Editor will tell Ableton Live to use an external sample editor if you have any. Library is a section where you define the browser behavior and tell Ableton Live the location of your user library. Now, the browser's behavior is a small subsection which has just 4 options. And the first one is collect files on export. And this can set to never, always, or ask. And the idea here is that Ableton Live will collect all the files you used in the project at the time of the project export. I recommend keeping it as always so that you don't have to do it yourself. The next one is show downloadable packs. And a couple of videos ago I told you that Ableton Live has its own expansion packs. So this option is about those packs. If it is turned on, Ableton Live will show you all the available packs and all the updates for the packs you have downloaded and installed. Now the Show Cloud is for those of you who use Ableton Note. And if it is turned on, you will be able to synchronize the files and projects in Ableton Live and in Ableton Note. And Show Push is the same thing, but for those of you who use Push 3. Now the next one is the content locations. And the idea is that you can save settings for any Ableton Live module and recall it back when needed. These settings are saved as standalone files in user library. I personally never keep my files there because I have my own dedicated folder for that purpose, but if it works for you, at least you will know where these files are or will be stored on your hard drive. Plugin section is also very important because here you set up your plugins locations and behavior in Ableton Live. VST plugin custom folder and VST3 plugin custom folder are locations of your VST2 and VST3 plugins respectively. If you change them, you'll also need to turn on the Use VST2 plugin custom folder and Use VST3 plugin custom folder. Typically, you'd have a custom folder for VST2 plugins because you can choose it at the installation step, but VST3 plugin folder is usually never changed. That's why there's additional Use VST3 plugin system folder setting that you can use for VST3 instead. Once all the locations are set, click on Rescan button and all your installed plugins will appear on the plugin section in browser. Now plugins window subsection is also worth paying attention to. Multiple plugin window will allow you to keep many plugins open at the same time. And if you disable it, only the active plugins window will be shown on screen. That's why I recommend keeping it on. Auto hide plugin window will only show the plugins of the currently active track. So once you switch to another track, they will disappear from the screen and will be replaced by plugins of another active track. I recommend keeping it on because sometimes you need to see the changes on one track after you made changes with the plugins in another. And Auto Open plugin windows will automatically show plugins window once you add it to the track. I recommend setting it to off because it may be just annoying. Record Warp Launch is a section where you adjust clip settings, and a record subsection is referring to recorded clips. Now file type is where you choose which file type is used for a recording, the WAV or AIFF. And they are both lossless, so choose whichever one you like more. The bit depth is a bit depth of a recording, and I recommend choosing 24-bit here. Now count in is the number of bars Ableton Live will count in before recording begins. I recommend choosing 1 bar here. Exclusive ARM and solo buttons will make only one track armed for recording or being soloed at a time. So for example, if you have armed track 1 for recording and then armed track 2 for recording, track 1 will be automatically unarmed. Clip update rate and record session automation in are the settings referring to session recording nuances that I will skip for now. And Start Playback with Record defines whether you'll need to press play button additionally to record button to start recording. Default value is no, you won't, and I suggest you keep it as it is. Warp Fade subsection is about recorded or imported audio clips, and Loop Warp Short Samples defines whether or not Ableton Live will warp short clips automatically. I prefer to keep it as unwarped one-shot. Auto Warp Long Samples is the same thing, but for long samples. I prefer to keep it as off. The default warp mode is the warp mode used by Ableton Live by default. Ableton Live has plenty to choose from, but I recommend keeping Beats here. Create Fades on Clip Edges defines whether Ableton Live will create short fade in and fade out for clips, and I prefer to keep it as off. Launch subsection is about Session View and clips. Again, I don't really have much experience with Session View to tell you which settings are more convenient or preferable and why, so I'm going to skip it for now. The Start Playback with Tap Tempo setting in the Tap Tempo subsection will start the playback once you finish tapping on Tap Tempo button. If this is set to off, Ableton Live will only set the tempo and wait for play button to be pressed to start the playback. Finally, Draw Mode with Pitch Lock in MIDI note drawing section is a switch that, when set to off, will allow you to freely draw MIDI notes in MIDI clips, but if you press Alt, it will lock all additional notes to just one note. When enabled, it works the other way around. It sounds complicated, and to be honest, this setting looks completely useless to me, so just keep it off and forget about it. Okay, so far we talked about why I love Ableton Live, its user interface, and how to do some initial basic setup. These were the foundation videos, and now I think we can go closer to the workflow. And as a next step, I want to make a video about Ableton Live's track types and signal routing, and I hope to see you all there. As for today, we're done. Your likes, comments, shares, subscriptions are much appreciated. Thanks for watching. Take care. See you. Bye bye.